What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another guide to Monster Hunter Rise. In this video we're going to be demonstrating a pre-Sunbreak build, this time for the hammer. Now as always, what is a pre-Sunbreak build? Well, it's an endgame Monster Hunter Rise build that we can take into the start of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak to take on the early Master Rank monsters relatively comfortably. Whilst these builds will soon be replaced with Master Rank gear and armor, these builds are nonetheless aimed to give you the best possible head start. Now before we get into the video, if you're a fan of these builds, please consider subscribing to the channel, as well as leaving a like on the video, as we try to bring you a variety of builds for a variety of different games. Now when it comes to the hammer, I've done a lot of testing to what is a comfortable build to use for the weapon, whilst at the same time providing a decent amount of damage and DPS output. And upon testing, I've come to the conclusion that the Valstrax armor set, the Valstrax build, is one of the safest builds for the hammer. The hammer isn't really a decoration-hungry weapon. Yes, it is able to make use of a few certain and optional decorations to give them skills like Slugger that the weapon can definitely utilise efficiently, but for the most part it's not that hungry when compared to other weapons in the game. And thus, the Valstrax build combined with a few other optional skills gives you quite a balanced build that should be able to take on the start of Sunbreak quite easily. So, with the hammer, I present to you the pre-Sunbreak balance build. Now for this you'll need the full Valstrax armor set, which includes the Valstrax helm, Valstrax mail, Valstrax braces, Valstrax coil and the Valstrax greaves. As for your petalace, this is down to personal preference. I'm using an absolute petalace here for more health, and then when it comes to your talisman, this in all honesty is down to what you have available to you, as no one has exactly the same talismans. And when it comes to this build can be pretty much created without the need of a talisman. The talisman is purely optional. It gives you the option to use a personal preference skill, and so I'm using a talisman that has maxed out Divine Blessing, a tier 3 decoration slot and a tier 1 decoration slot. It also has 1 point in recovery up, but this is a byproduct. I'm mainly using this for the Divine Blessing skill, so if there is another skill that you'd like to use, such as Slugger in the case of the hammer, you can use a talisman with that skill on instead. Now when it comes to the weapons, you have really 3 options to you: the Rampage hammer, the Tigrex hammer, or as I'm using here, the Nargacuga hammer, Night Eternal. This has an attack boost Rampage skill on it. The Night Eternal Nargacuga hammer, whilst it has the lowest raw attack out of the 3 hammers I suggested, it nonetheless has the highest affinity, a decent chunk of white sharpness and a tier 2 decoration slot on it, making it highly customizable and allows us to make a solid build. Now when it comes to the decorations, you've got a fair few to play around with. So first of all, I've gone for critical jaws to max out crit boost. I've then gone for steadfast jaws to max out stun resistance. This is an optional skill in all honesty. I've then gone for mastery jaws to max out master's touch. And then I've got a few jaws to play around with, to which I've gone for an expert jaw for a point in critical eye and a brace jaw for a point in flinch free. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 218 raw attack with no element. You'll have a decent chunk of white sharpness with 50% base affinity. This can easily be 100% when you take into account weakness exploit as well. And you'll have a strong defense of 581. That is exceedingly strong against dragon, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, but this won't matter when Dragonheart is active. As for the switch skills, these are down to personal preference, although I will recommend using Water Strike if your build lacks defensive skills. Now as for the skills, first of all you have Dragonheart at level 5. This is a result of the Valstrax armor set. Dragonheart at level 5, whenever we have 80% health or less, we will contract Dragon Blight. But in doing this, it will set all our elemental resistances to 50 and will gain 10% increased attack power. You'll then have Resentment at level 3. Resentment is a skill that whenever we have a red portion of health on our health bar, will gain increased raw attack. You'll then have Resuscitate at level 3, which is a wonderful skill that works well in unison with Dragonheart. Whenever we have a blight or ailment on our hunter, such as the Dragon Blight from Dragonheart, our raw attack will be increased. So the 2 skills synergize well together. You'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our critical hits, but this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or ailment portion, but we're using an elementalist weapon focused on raw attack with exceedingly high affinity, so Critical Boost is essential. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3. Weakness Exploit is a skill that increases our affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity, allowing us to get to that 100% affinity so long as we're accurate with our attacks. You'll then have Master's Touch at level 3. Master's Touch is a skill that gives us a chance at not losing any sharpness whenever we crit a monster, helping us keep the white sharpness on a weapon for longer periods. You'll then have Divine Blessing at level 3, which is our optional talisman skill, but it is useful as it's a quality of life and defensive skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage should we take a hit from a monster. You'll then have Stun Resistance at level 3, another quality of life skill that I personally like to use, and it is optional. Stun resistance basically negates all stun effects on our hunters. You'll then have critical eye at level 1, which gives us 5% base affinity, which allows our base affinity to get to that 50%. You'll then have recovery up at level 1, a byproduct of our talisman, but slightly increases how much health we recover from potions and such. And then you'll have flinch free at level 1. Flinch free is a skill that prevents minor knockbacks from monsters or our fellow hunters. So that is the balanced build I would recommend for the hammer. Whilst it has a lot of damage skills, it is also balanced out with some quality of life and defensive skills. Like I said, the talisman allows you a lot of options for optional skills, so if you don't like Divine Blessing for example, you can replace that with something you prefer like Evade Window, or even more damage focused skills. The choice is up to you. But every build out there has various pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to this balanced hammer build, its biggest pro is its raw damage output. Thanks to having 100% affinity, so long as we're going for monster weak points, combined with critical boost, Dragonheart, Resuscitate and more, we're able to bring down monsters exceedingly quickly with this build. On top of that, this build has quality of life aspects to it. From Master's Touch, which helps manage our sharpness gauge, to Divine Blessing, which can potentially keep us alive, to stun resistance, and the defensive aspects of Dragonheart. These will all make a hunt feel easier than it is. And then lastly, for this build, it can be used against pretty much any monster in the game. One of my main goals with these pre-Sunbreak builds was to create builds that can be universal, that can be used against any monster. And thus normally these builds are elementalist builds, as is the case with this build shown here, or they tend to focus on the poison element. This hammer build being an elementalist build means that we don't have to take into consideration a monster's elemental or element resistances, which will be great for the start of Sunbreak. But unfortunately there are cons to every build out there. One of the biggest cons for this build is unfortunately, for maximum damage output, you have to have your health at 80% or lower. This can be risky in of itself, but skills like Divine Blessing as well as the defense boost we get from Dragonheart can help keep us alive. And the other con, which is more of a con of my own making, is that there is no slugger skill on this build. The hammer is one of the rare weapons that can really make use and take advantage of the slugger skill to KO monsters, knocking them out and crowd controlling them. But unfortunately this build does not have it. That's not to say that this build cannot knock monsters out, it still can, as the hammer is a blunt weapon. It just won't be able to do it as often as a build that had the slugger skill on it. But even without the slugger skill, this build is exceedingly strong when it comes to the end game of Monster Hunter Rise, and it should give hammer users a great head start when it comes to taking on Sunbreak and Master Rank. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a pre-Sunbreak build for the hammer in Monster Hunter Rise. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.